Welcome, everybody. This is part of our segments that we are now calling Under the Crosshairs. We had our first Under the Crosshairs Unfiltered last night with Blake H. And today we had some information that was released about one of our researchers' POIs. That she has been researching for quite a while on Zodiac theory. And it was very topical. So we felt like this would be a great time to come out and present on this POI. She actually has done our first feature for our Under the Crosshairs, which is already at its fourth production piece, and we are heading into our fifth. So you can look forward to that if you are more interested in learning more about her POI. She does an excellent presentation. Today's presentation is actually very much off the cuff, where we're going to be addressing some of the questions about the information that has currently been released about her POI yesterday. So welcome, Kim. This is Kim from Zodiac Theory Discord. Kim's POI is Frederick Harlan Co. And yesterday we found out some information that he is actually going to be released. So we thought where it was very topical, it would be good for our community to learn a little bit more about him, so that you can learn a little bit more about him as a possible Zodiac suspect. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Cheryl.
If you want to tell us, first of all, just a little bit about Frederick Harlan Co. And exactly what is going on with him right now that brought us to this point where we're doing this live today.
Okay. So he is a man who ran a high-density, highly prolific, and ultimately high-profile rape spree in Spokane, starting in 1978 and continuing to his arrest in March 1981. Took them a while to catch up to him, and he tallied up a lot of victims in the meantime. So after his arrest, he went through trial. He was put through trial, and he was convicted on 4 out of 6 charges that were levied against him. And he was sentenced to ultimately 25 years in the penitentiary. So he is very active on behalf of his legal defense, or he was at least for many years. And he filed for appeal, and he ultimately, the convictions were thrown out, and he was tried in 1985, and there were 4 charges against him at the time, and 3 of them held, and he was convicted based on 3. Later, 2 of those would be thrown out because of hypnosis of the victims, which was a common controversy during those years. So it's not considered valid if a victim's been hypnotized, gone through whatever process that is per the department that's involved. So he ultimately served his entire sentence based on 1 conviction. And when he was nearing release, the state of Washington filed to have him civilly committed as a violent sex offender. And they have housing for that on McNeil Island off the coast in Washington. They used to have a federal penitentiary there, but that was disbanded at some point. And the only thing left on the island is the center there, the confinement center for sexually violent predators. And that's where he has been since 2008.
Great. And I'd like to remind any of you who are joining us in the chat, if you do have any questions for Kim, please enter them in to your chat in YouTube. Also, if you could, to support the channel, please like, subscribe, and share if you could. And if you put your questions in the chat, we will try to get to those questions. We do have a few questions that we have from our Zodiac Theory Discord community that we have already preloaded to get us started, but we definitely want to hear about the questions from the YouTube community at large. So let's go ahead and get started. So first question, Kim. With Coe's recent release, what is the single most critical aspect of his profile the public needs to understand?
Well, it's important to know that he's never confessed. He's never fully confessed to his crimes. He's never confessed to any of it. He's denied. He's been in constant denial since his arrest, and that there are some very significant periods in his timeline when he was out of state, and they've never really been brought to light as far as exactly what he was doing. There's very significant holes in the timeline. There were efforts made by the police at the time when they're investigating him, but he gave some misinformation and they met with dead ends. Some of the timeline is well documented. He was married for a few years, and so we know some of that with certainty, but there are some very significant gaps at some very critical times.
Okay, good. Next question. Prosecutors once believed Coe was capable of murder. Does his release suggest the assessment has changed?
No, there is no change in perspective on him in the state of Washington. Like I said, he's an unconfessed criminal, and as a result, he did not participate in any rehabilitation programs while he was in prison or while he was at McNeil Island. So their perspective has not changed, other than concerning his physical state. It has deteriorated significantly, and they feel, as a result, that he would not be a threat to the public if released. So they did decide to release that he would be released today at his hearing. And the reason for that being, and I'm going to read the media release statement from the Attorney General's office here, that the state cannot meet its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Coe is likely to commit predatory acts of sexual violence if released. And so that is the rationale.
And that's kind of an interesting take. And I think that one of the things that I was thinking about when I first heard about this possible release was actually the murderer that was, I believe it was last year or the year before, that was released, and he was in his 80s, and they thought that he would not reoffend, and they ended up finding him pushing a shopping cart with the dead body in it after his release, and that was like within a month's time.
That's sobering. He has had a stroke. He does have heart failure. So there's reason to believe he would have trouble exhibiting the sort of exertion he would need to do that. And he will be in a group home. So there will be a lot of supervision.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Next question. How does Coe's release impact your investigation and the urgency of your research?
It doesn't really alter it. I would say that I'll continue as I have for the last 6+ years. There'll be probably a lot of news articles coming forward still. Maybe there will be details coming out now, be useful. But other than that, it's been a progressive investigation. I think it will continue as it has been.
Next question. What is the main argument against Coe being Zodiac, and how do you counter it? What do you say to people who are... I'm sorry, go ahead and answer that one.
It's just a really good question. I think the immediate reaction for people is different MO, not the Zodiac. But I want to say very clearly that I've never said I'm concerned about him in the context of the Zodiac because he was a violent, prolific rapist in Spokane in the late 1970s. It's such a small part of his history that it's come to the point where it almost doesn't hardly factor in. It's maybe evidence that he's capable of violent offending, but aside from that, we really have to ask what really is his MO if we put that aside, that narrow band of time. And we see a person who constructed alternate personas in order to further his goals. He has a consistent repeat theme with him that he did this in his life from his teens on up. He was a prolific letter writer. He needed to have a sense of superiority over others. He's quoted as he is someone who always wanted an edge over everybody. He engaged in urgent communications with the newspapers late in his rape spree, and he made threats to the police. And a lot of these things resonate very well with the Zodiac spree, especially the alternate persona and the monikers that Fred Coe would operate under. That's very resonant with the Zodiac killing spree.
And for those of you who are just joining us, in Kim's, we're up to 5 parts at this point. You are definitely going to want to catch that because even if you're joining us from outside of the Zodiac community in the further true crime community, he is a fascinating case study. Because like Kim said, there is quite a bit that when you look at his background and his crimes, not just how it fits into Zodiac, but other possible crimes that he may have committed. It is an interesting case study, and Kim does a great job of presenting all of that in a very methodical way. So second part of the question here, Kim, what do you say to people who are adamant that the South Hill Rapist and the Zodiac Killer cannot be the same person?
So sort of like I said, stop thinking of him as just the South Hill Rapist. He's a way more complicated individual than that, and it really just characterizes a 3-year period in his timeline. And there's so much else going on before that with him, and he has so many goals and desires that aren't reflected in his rape spree.
Yeah, he's a very psychologically complex person when you look at his background. All right, next one we have, you described Coe as a hollow facade who borrowed personas. Who was the real Frederick Coe?
Well, I think he was a frustrated son of a city editor. He had a very unstable sense of himself, and that is exhibited in that, taking on those different personalities, kind of reinventing himself on a regular basis and borrowing from other people's vocabularies and manner of dress and being. He had his idols, and he certainly was able to transform himself in their image. So, growing up the son of the city editor, he was somebody who had a lot of access to the news. He saw what got attention. Certainly, he had discomfort around other males, and he was very, very upset by the lack of attention from his female peers that he thought he deserved. And he was even found muttering about that to a colleague at age 34. In high school, I couldn't get, like my shorter friends, the girls lined up for them, but they didn't for me. This is, many years out of high school when you would have thought, going on middle-aged adult would have gotten over some of this at this point.
The next one, how did the controlling, fantasy-prone relationship with his mother, Ruth Coe, shape his motivation?
Well, I think really a lot of his motivation stemmed from her. She put a lot of pressure on him to succeed. When he was just a kid, his mother would take him and his sister to open houses so they could see the material possessions other people had in their houses. And she'd say, you got to make a lot of money. You're my insurance. And he would say as a kid, I'm gonna buy you a big car and a fur coat. And so his goals to become as wealthy and as famous and as handsome and as healthy as he could possibly become largely stemmed from her. She was also into fashion and modeling. So that's, again, the appearance, the looks, and she was into the status. And those sorts of things were important to her. And she had a lot of spite because she was kind of alienated in her community, viewed by a lot of people as eccentric. And he is described as an extension of her spite in one source.
And when you're talking about the importance of appearance, one thing that struck me was all the photos that you showed during your presentation was the fact that he really did look completely different. And he did not look like the same person at all in a lot of those photographs that you showed during your presentation. So that's a good point to make.
We do have a photo here that's closest in time to the, sorry, looks like I got the wrong thing up here. Let's try again. That's closest in time to the Zodiac period. So I just wanted to throw that up. So
yeah, you can kind of see that widow's peak in his
yeah.
head.
And it's interesting because a lot of the other photos I've shared, he doesn't really look a lot like that. But a lot of the photos I've shared are from later when he was in real estate. He was trying to really look like the highly successful businessman that he wasn't. So
And you also said he had a little bit of an obsession with weight. You know, during that time, because his mother kind of had that modeling background. So
yeah, he was very obsessed with his health habits and his diet. And it wasn't just directed at his physique either. It was about his voice and protecting his radio voice. And but it was all part of the underlying handsome and as healthy as he could possibly become. Very clear goals at a very young age. He stated that about age 9 on up, and he never deviated.
Next question. Co-stated goal was to become rich and famous. How does murder serve as a vehicle for that goal?
Well, like I said earlier, he was really in tune to the newspapers, growing up in a newspaper household. And he certainly knew what made headlines. So if you're trying to become as famous as you can be, but you're not really progressing in your personal life, what was going on with him by the time the Zodiac series rolled around was that he dropped out of a couple of universities. So, he wasn't really getting anywhere as far as really making any traction. He'd been to radio school. He did get through that. But if you want to make headlines, what would you do? What would you pick? You probably wouldn't go volunteer at the Red Cross. That's not going to make the headlines. So, he wanted attention. I think that would be a very effective way of getting it. Murderers get headlines. And sometimes that's controversy. The newspapers don't like to print all that because they know they're giving some of them what they want.
Right.
That was the tension in the Zodiac series, for sure.
Yeah. The also one of the important things that you want to look at is the fact that he's getting the attention from his father. His father was a newspaper editor. So that attention that he was desiring from his own father seemed like that really was also a motivating factor.
Yeah, it's interesting. We see another pattern with him. Like he definitely would talk about his father and the bench bar press guidelines, and trying to affiliate himself with his dad through some other efforts he engaged in Spokane at later in the 70s. He tried to affiliate himself with his father. His father was very successful. He was successful all the way through high school, college. He served in World War II. And then he came back to Spokane and he became, instantly an employee again of the Spokesman Review, and worked his way up ultimately to managing editor at his retirement. But he was the city editor the entire time Fred was growing up. Very successful, involved in a lot of organizations, an Army Reserve colonel for years. He did teaching, instruction, all sorts of things. We could have a whole episode just on his and interests and his accomplishments in his life. And Fred certainly felt, like he didn't measure up, I'm sure. He was held to a high standard, and he never met really any of it. So I'm sure that was a source of personal frustration for him, but he would channel other people as well when he wanted to inflate himself. Like his friend was a really good boxer. And one time when he got chased down when he was in the midst of committing a crime, he said, I'm a Golden Gloves boxer, and he was trying to intimidate them, but he wasn't. His friend was, but he wasn't, and I'd see this pattern crop up in different ways, like channeling somebody else's accomplishments.
Next question. He was a known voyeur and watcher. How does this specific trait connect to the Zodiac attack patterns?
Well, we do know that a lot of serial offenders, rapists, and murderers do have these sorts of crimes in their history, and Coe is no exception. He was described as a voyeur. It was said that he raised voyeurism to the level of a neighborhood art form. That sounds like he was pretty committed to it. And I know I've spoken with someone who was drug along on one of his evenings, and he was doing everything he could to alert the girl of their presence, so far as to picking the largest tree branch he could find and snapping it. So I thought that was actually a humorous story. But he did a lot of that sort of thing, and I think it in some way does resonate. But even more so with Fred Coe, it gets even more bizarre because he actually had this thing where he would find a girl who was, considered an easy lay. He called them nymphs. He'd get his friend and he'd say, "Hey, Humpy, I found a nymph. Let's go." And the goal was that this girl and his friend would have sex in a vehicle, and he would position himself as the lookout. And his friend later on testified, he basically revealed that he said he knew that he wasn't there to be the lookout for the police, that his thing was watching. And so that's what Fred was getting out of it. He was in control of the situation. He orchestrated, he set the whole stage up, and then he positioned himself. He was very much in control of that sort of scenario. And that, to me, that connects kind of with the Zodiac, with when he's, selecting victims, that he's going after couples and parked cars because, he's somebody that wants some kind of measure of control or superiority over that situation. So
And that's interesting to note, because when we look at the Zodiac, people really do look at the fact that there was no sexual attack during those, and even though they're done in Lover's Lane, other than Paul Stein, people do. There is still quite a bit of debate, but when you look at his behavior closest to the time frame of the Zodiacs, of that voyeuristic behavior, and then seeing that as a pattern of escalation in his particular pattern, it really does have it fits in. You can kind of see where if he is a Zodiac, it does fit with the pattern of escalation, not just for him, but also possibly for Zodiac.
yeah, yeah, I think so.
Next question. Can you explain his philosophy of situational ethics and how it could justify murder?
Well, yeah, that was a big deal to him, that situational ethics philosophy of his, and he would lecture other people about it. And basically, he would say, in situational ethics, the situation governs your morals and ethics. And because situations can change, so can morals and ethics. So he used this to rationalize lying. He couldn't figure out why his Christian friend couldn't lie on the stand in his defense. Was absolutely baffled by it. I don't understand why you can't do that. He also used it to rationalize a lot of theft. Him and his wife, when they lived down in California, they did a lot of dining and dashing. They had a whole routine, and he had no trouble rationalizing that if somebody gave his girlfriend too much change or something and she gave it back, he'd be angry. He said, "Well, that money belongs to me. They made a mistake, so it's mine." That's what came out of his mouth on a very regular basis. He liked to go into that topic. He liked to lecture on it. So I think that what we have is somebody who can compartmentalize their actions. They can separate, the morality from an act by however they choose to frame it. So he did a lot of that. And also it, I think, plays in here with the different personas. I think he can put something under a particular persona, and then that's not Fred Coe, or that's not, he goes by Kevin Coe now, that's not Kevin Coe. I had got a very interesting thing the other day, an audio file that has him, a 45-minute file talking to this woman he's corresponding with, and he wants to marry her. So it functions as a proposal of sorts, a very bizarre one, but he's telling her what she's going to get with Kevin Coe, and he's talking in the third person with Kevin Coe. Kevin Coe's never been violent to women. Kevin Coe, the needs of the woman come first. He's gone on and on like this. So that's Kevin Coe. So he's constructed this person under this name that he legally took after his first conviction. Once he was in prison, he changed it. There's some information out there that it was before that, but it's not true. I have the documents. He did that after he was incarcerated. And we hear all about what Kevin Coe is going to be like to be married to, and that's a very different person than Fred Coe. So
And we do have some people in the live, so just a reminder, if you do have some questions, feel free to put them in chat. We do have a list of questions from our Zodiac Theory Discord that we are going through, but we will be getting to further questions from our expanded YouTube community. So we definitely would love to have your questions on Kim's POI, Frederick, Harlan Co. that we are reviewing right now. He is having a hearing today about a possible release. So that is why we are doing this unfiltered review. And if you are interested in hearing more about her POI, we are doing a further Into the Crosshairs full review. She's done four different shows so far. We have the fifth one on the calendar coming up. So make sure that you like, subscribe, and share. And that way you can watch when we release her upcoming further in-depth interview on this. Next question. Prosecutors once believed Coe was capable of murder. Does his release suggest the assessment has changed? Actually, we've already asked that one, I believe. How does Coe's documented lack of empathy, like his reaction to his grandfather's death, align with a serial killer's mindset?
Well, we do know about serial killers that they don't grieve, deaths of family members generally or pets, that sort of thing. I may have looked that up, and in rare cases, sometimes it can evoke some kind of emotional reaction, but it's not necessarily like a true grief, like a typical person would experience when they lose, a pet that they've had for 10 years. So he very much did not display any sort of angst after events like that in his life. There's some very interesting stories about that. So I think that he checks that box as far as being able to take a life and not feel afterwards regret, remorse. But there is some interesting in his history. After some of his rapes, he did break down crying and start apologizing. And I think again, but he'd quickly then the mask would drop, even before he left the room, he'd threaten them again on the way out. And I think maybe the rape itself was the emotional release of pent up rage. And the crying could be more the result of a reaction to that anger release than, I don't think he had any true regret. He never confessed to anything. He never apologized for anything officially. Only in the heat of the moment was that kind of behavior ever observed.
Next question. Why did Coe pay someone to beat up his best friend? And what does that reveal about his methods?
Yeah, this is an event from his childhood. His friend that was into boxing, he paid a kid twice the size of his scrappy little friend to beat him up. He actually paid him like $1, and his friend didn't know about it. What the conditions were of what was going on. He just thought he was going to have a fight with this guy, and he just got pummeled. And to this day can feel some pain from the result of that. So it's kind of it's interesting that I think this just reveals more of Coe's need to be in control of the situation, and also might have revealed some insecurity relative to his accomplished friend. Well, I'm not good at this like he is, but I can pay someone to beat him up. I can in a sense out achieve him in that regard.
How directly does Coe's documented obsession with the Marquis de Sade link to Zodiac slaves and paradise theme?
Well, we have in that literature a source of that reference in the Zodiac letters, that idea of having someone to work for you in the afterlife. And most people, if they read one of de Sade's books, aren't going to hone in on this tiny little detail that's presented in the book. But again, this is Frederick Coe. He has his favorite books. He studies things intensely. He borrows extensively from the things that he admires. He reads them through cover to cover multiple times in order to sponge all this up. So it does make sense that someone like him could extract a detail like that could be the source. the ideation for what was written in the Zodiac letters, if he is indeed the Zodiac. And if he is, then I would definitely say that that was the source of his ideas there. Late in his rape spree, he also made some cryptic comment to his girlfriend. He said, about, they're in Spokane, he says, "I have angels all over this place." And he never defined that. But it's the same kind of concept, kind of this other being, that I have power over. So
Are these specific phrases Coe used during his known crimes that were lifted directly from the de Sade's writings?
yes, there are instances where he asked victims to utter certain phrases. I'm not actually going to repeat them here because they're so off color, but they straight out of de Sade. He would ask her to say X, Y, Z. Also, the actions during the rapes. One thing that's unique about his rape spree is he was heavily engaged in urophilia and coprophilia, which is number 1 and number 2. And he was reported in the massage parlor in Spokane to have peed on the hot rocks there. People found him a bit off-putting, as you can imagine, but he would ask his victims to defecate and to urinate. I mean, he would badger them to do these things, and that's right out of de Sade. The de Sade literature is absolutely rife with that sort of thing. It makes it very, very hard to read, even for research purposes.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that book is very, very difficult to read about. All right. Did Coe's unpublished novels Snowy and Outrage take their titles from the de Sade's work?
Yeah, these are words that we find in de Sade's book as well. Outrage kind of meaning some sexual act committed on somebody without their consent. That's ravaging, violent, murderous, that sort of thing. Outrage. And Snowy was a description that's used in de Sade's book in a couple of cases, and Coe used it in his own. He used it verbally. There's a example of that, and then he also named one of his books Snowy.
The movie de Sade was playing near the Stein murder scene. What is the significance of the geographical and thematic link?
Well, if we're talking about Fred Coe, certainly he would have enjoyed taking that movie in. Were he there that evening, and so then he would have been available to potentially hail a cab afterwards. So it would have been a draw for him to the area. But that's all the way we're talking about the night of this Paul Stein episode. So this is somebody that had to have been present earlier than that. So we need information that makes us believe that he was there for a significant period of time in the late part of 1969. Not just the movie playing that night, but he certainly would have enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. Does the language in the Bates confession letter squirmed and shook parallel language found in the de Sade's work?
Yeah, we find that, especially the use of the word squirm in there, and it's associated with sexual activity, that sort of thing. And I find it interesting because I have a letter that Coe wrote to a woman from prison, and he talks about what he's going to do with her when they can be together. It's all a bunch of sexual stuff, and he says, "I'm going to make you squirm, baby, make you squirm." And so I find that kind of unique language. And I think that that's the kind of thing, if we're talking about forensic linguistics, that can actually has the potential to point to a specific author.
Good point. Why would Coe specifically lie about his 1968 San Francisco radio school timeline?
Well, I have met an individual who was in class with him in San Francisco at Career Academy, and he's very definite that the term began in January of 68, continued to May, though a couple of people, he says, showed up a little late, about a month late. And in one source, we find Coe saying he went to radio school in San Francisco for 4 months. So I think it's highly likely he was one of the individuals that was late. And further evidence of that is the fact that I have a a radio school class photo from Southern California that he's present in January of 68. He went back to that same school in mid 1968, but I think he flunked out, or he got into an altercation with the instructor, who was very militant and is someone Coe would not have gotten along with because he liked to argue with his instructors. And he was reported to be doing so at Career Academy in San Francisco. This individual I spoke with said, "So I recall he liked to argue with the staff," and he did that in high school too. He described Fred Coe perfectly.
Okay, next question. What evidence suggests Coe was in San Francisco during his unexplained timeline gap in the second half of 1960?
All right. Well, I have a deposition that was taken in preparation for his civil commitment hearing. Back, when I said the state had filed to prevent him from being released into the public. And it's a 400-page deposition, and they did a good job. But he's a wily sort of dude. So they went through his timeline as far as his occupational pursuits. They went through his timeline with his academic pursuits, and they were honing in on this section after he reports he quit radio jobs back in Spokane. I know he was up there the first part of 69 and for a few months was working in radio. And they said, so he says he quit his radio jobs in very late spring. So summer starts in June. So by sometime in June, it would have had to have been. And then he says he was starting this book publishing business where he's going to cobble together the work of others, compile it into a book, and advertise and sell it. It was supposed to be like about marketing and sales type stuff, which was what he studied in college, but he didn't get very far in college, so he's no expert. So he's going to plagiarize the work of others. He's saying that's the purpose of the business. There's no real reported success or evidence of any real success from the business, yet he's 22 years old and he quits all his paying jobs. And then the prosecutor's like, well, okay, so when you were doing this and working on this book publishing business, were you doing that from Spokane? And he's saying the whole time that he's not remembering exactly when he started this book publishing business, even though he quit these jobs to do so. And he says, so were you in Spokane when you were doing this? And he says, yeah, if that's what I was doing. I mean, so much in this deposition, he's specific and he's giving responses and he's saying, I was here, I was here, I was here. And then we have a 22-year-old adult male that has resigned from jobs to do this business, and he cannot remember the details, and it's just not believable. So elsewhere, there's information that says that he, returned to California after radio school and before 1970 when he ultimately went down to LA.
Those gaps really are very interesting, one way or the other, because like we've discussed before in your further interviews, is that even if he isn't the Zodiac, what was he doing during that time frame? So
yeah, he's very disclosing about a lot in this deposition. So why not here? Why is this the big hole? So
yeah, where are the gaps? For those of you who are joining us, it looks like we've got a few more people. We are discussing Frederick Harlan Coe, who is our Zodiac Theory Discord member, Kim's POI. The reason that we are doing this under the Crosshairs Unfiltered today is because yesterday we found out that he is having a hearing today of possibly being released. So this is going to give Kim an opportunity to talk a little bit about her suspect. And if you are interested in hearing more about Frederick Harlan Coe and the possibility of him being the Zodiac Killer, please make sure that you like, subscribe, and please share. It helps out the channel. And Kim has done a 4-part series already that we have in the can that we will be releasing, as well as a 5th part that is coming up, we believe is going to be on October 19th. And so if you are interested in this, whether you're into Zodiac Killer community, or if you are interested in true crime in general, He is a fascinating case, and Kim does an amazing job of outlining him as a possible not just as a possible Zodiac POI, but also as just a very interesting psychological case and criminal case to follow. So please make sure that you follow us. Next question we have, oh, and also if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat. We will be going through. We have a few questions from our Zodiac Theory Discord, and we will also be answering from further questions from the YouTube channel at large. Next question. As a non-resident, how did Coe gain such familiarity with the remote lovers lanes in Vallejo and Napa?
Well, that's a very good question. It's well known about him that he covered a lot of distance. If I were going to compare him to another serial offender, I think as far as that goes, Ted Bundy's a good comparison. Just from the era they were born, but also from the fact that they lived in different areas of the country when they were committing their offenses. And he co-drove a lot. He covered a lot of distance, and even that was even exhibited in his Southfield rape spree. He did a lot of stalking. He drove hard and fast all over the city. The police, when they were tailing him, couldn't even they would lose him because they literally could not keep up. And he drove a lot. He drove a lot back and forth between California and Washington. He made a cryptic comment to his girlfriend one time that he drove through Oregon at night with his lights out fast so that he wouldn't get picked up. And it causes one to question what he did there, like why Oregon? So anyway, if he is motivated to do something, he is described as someone whose learning powers were frightening. And I think if he were stalking in an area and he was unfamiliar with the area, he would be more than capable of scoping out the locations where he would expect to find the sort of victims he wanted to target. I give him that 100%. So I absolutely do. His friend told me an interesting story about when they were both in real estate back in Spokane. His friend was working hard, taking clients around, showing them houses. And he said, Coe wasn't even in the office hardly. He said he wasn't producing much. He said, but one day they had both gotten brand new vehicles at the same time. And one time he got in behind the wheel of Coe's car and saw the odometer, excuse me. And he said he couldn't believe the mileage on his car. He said his was nowhere near that high. And he had been working so hard in real estate day to day, driving people all over the place. And Coe's was just through the roof. He was absolutely shocked. And he said it made a lot of sense later, but this was a guy who put on a lot of miles.
What personal significance did the intersection of Washington and Maple have for Coe?
Well, like I said, he was born in Spokane in February 2nd of 1947. And when he came home from the hospital, he was brought home to his parents' residence that was at South 1218 Maple Street in Spokane. And this is a picture of the house. Surely in not the form it was at the time. I'm sure it looks different now, but this is the home he came to reside in until he was about 3 years old. And his earliest memories may be in this house. A lot of his rapes occurred. Maple Street was like the epicenter of his rape spree. But his parents eventually, when he was 3, would move to a different address on the South Hill of Spokane. But I believe his earliest memories probably come from this house and the abuse he suffered from his mother. In these situations, we know this starts very, very early. And he bizarrely, when he was on trial and he was on the stand, he was testifying about memories from his diaper days and the sensual feeling when his mother touched his penis. It's kind of bizarre. You're on trial for rape, and this is what you are saying on the stand. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but then a lot of things don't make sense that came out of his mouth. So I think his earliest memories probably were here, and that the abuse started young for him. So I think Maple Street probably in his mind, because he is kind of symbolic, probably signifies something for him. Washington, of course, he grew up in the state of Washington. So When he was nearing the end of his rape spree and he sent the cryptic poem to the newspapers, he speaks in the poem of Mother Washington, and that, of course, represents his own mother, the one that he knew.
Very interesting. Let's go on to the next one. How do you explain the 6-month silence between the first and second Zodiac attacks in the context of Coe's timeline?
Well, the best information I have says that he finished up in radio school in the summer of '68, so it would have been about July or August, and that he went right back to Spokane, and that he briefly worked in radio in Spokane. And then it says he went back to California looking for radio work and reports that it was unsuccessful. And that really has to have been very late in 1968, or maybe fall to the end of the year, somewhere in there. And then we do have him working back in Spokane, back in radio for several months in this first half of 1969. So, and I do believe he was back there. It repeatedly, and there's nothing that conflicts with that story. And then he quits these jobs, and we don't have any sense of where he was. And because, he has amnesia and he can't remember it himself.
Yeah, those gaps really are interesting, especially as much detail as he goes into. Yeah, it really is interesting to take a look at those gaps.
Mhm.
Next question. He requested the San Francisco Chronicle by name while incarcerated. What does this decades-long interest signify?
Well, he always followed the news. He talked about the newspapers. He talked about how the newspapers covered his case, how unfair they were, so on and so forth. He always monitored the news. He saved newspaper clippings of his case when he was confined. Being in the media, having a book written about him, which he didn't like, but he didn't like the book, but there's also a movie made of him, made for TV, but he seems to appreciate that he has these things, and he cites them as the source of the trouble between him and another resident on McNeil Island, that person is just jealous because he has a book and movie about him. And he also, in a letter to a friend from prison in the '80s, is very interesting. His friend was going to be deciding whether or not he was going to talk to Jack Olson, was just the author of the book that was published about him. And he said, well, I leave it up to you if you want to talk to him. Not a lot of people in Spokane get the opportunities to be, in the news or, on TV. So, I understand if you want that opportunity, because a lot of people in Spokane don't get it. So this is something he covets. He covets the media attention. It's something he values.
And so, for those of you who are, what you're seeing on the screen is actually what Kim found. This is actually in Coe's longhand handwriting of all the newspapers that he requested while he was in prison. So all of those are in context to the Zodiac case are interesting, especially when you take a look at some of the top ones there are San Francisco Chronicle. Not just a local newspaper, but he really was someone who really read quite a few different newspapers. Okay. Next question. What was the strongest piece of evidence placing Coe in or near Southern California in the fall of '66?
Well, there's a documentary, and in the documentary, it talks about him going to Hollywood in 1966. That Spokane wasn't nearly big enough for the kind of success he had in mind. So, well, and it just says that he went in '66. It doesn't say that he went in the fall of '66. But when you look at his timeline that year, in the spring of '66, he was at Washington State University in Pullman. So we know that he didn't return to Pullman after that semester, but there's a record of a weekend offense in Spokane in May of that year. And then he reports working summer jobs that summer, 1966, in Spokane, and starting at Gonzaga University in the fall. He didn't get very far in Gonzaga. They report that he was there in the fall and then spring of '66, '67, and yet his his dates of attendance don't go through the end of the term. And the truth was he was pulled out of there in the spring of 67, and he enrolled at Washington State again at the Spokane Extension campus. So, and yet they have attendance dates listed at Gonzaga extending well into that spring semester. So we know that they're completely inaccurate. And it was just at some point that the registrar's office caught up and marked him done. So it brings into question, his attendance dates don't extend through the end of the term, but we don't know exactly when he quit going to class, when he stopped showing up. But we know he didn't finish this term at Gonzaga. He did not finish the fall term. So, so that in combination with the documentary, an interruption in his attendance, his failure to finish the term, and a documentary saying he went to Hollywood in the fall of 66, and one additional bit of detail that I think is important is that his best friend was in Army training down in California in the second half of 66. And he had always wanted to go out into the world with this guy together. Surely he felt the pull to California at the time. So I think there's a lot of things that are pointing in that direction. I think the documentary, it's a documentary. They're trying to be accurate. Haven't been able to chase down their source, even though I did interact with them. I think it came from somewhere. And I think probably I know who said it, but he's deceased now, so I can't talk to him.
How does the unsolved woman in red dress murder in Tiberian connect to Coe's potential travel to Riverside?
Well, I find that case fascinating because this woman was found deceased off a kind of a cliff right by Paradise Drive in Tiburon. And she was found in mid-December of 1966. And they had said in the news reports that she'd been deceased about 8 to 10 weeks. And when you backdate from December 18th to about mid-October, you get a full 8+ weeks. October has 31 days and November has 30. So you get 8+ weeks when you backdate to mid-October, and that predates Sherry Jo Bates. So to me, I can see a narrative working here that somebody was up around San Francisco and they encountered this woman and they murdered her, and then they drove down to Southern California from there. And the Riverside Desktop poem cites a woman in a red dress, and they don't know if she's dead, but maybe someone will find her. And if you put somebody over a cliff and you're not sure if they're deceased, but there's somewhere where she could be found, even though in this case it took a couple months, the narrative, it really works to me. And the time frame with how long they say she was deceased relative to when that desktop poem must have, been carved, because, later those desks were removed from the library, and the janitor, said, hey, these were in the library at the time of that homicide at the end of October. So, it just really works to me. And so it's somebody that would have moved from north to south. If Coe was coming down from Washington heading for Southern California, he would have driven, through that, at least the vicinity of that place. And if he paid a visit to San Francisco and hung around and drove around, it all fits. It could very much work for him. He's probably not happy. He's dropped out of another school. His mom's probably on his back. She's probably ticked him off. I can totally. It's an easy scenario to construct. So.
Coe was enrolled in a poetry class the semester he dropped out in 1966. How does this connect to the Riverside Desktop poem?
Again, we've got Coe dabbling in poetry. He did that in high school. He tried his hand at it in high school, and he got ridiculed by his peers, and they called him a bad poet, which is kind of cute. But he didn't like being made fun of. But it appears again, he's at Gonzaga in the fall of 66. He reports he was taking a poetry class. It was just an elective class. It wasn't his field of study. So he's taking a poetry class, and it's reported he goes to Hollywood that year, and we know he's dropped out. So it feeds into this narrative that says, here's somebody who might choose to express himself in poetry. He's upset, so what media will he use to express himself? And Coe definitely used media as a source of expression.
And just a reminder, we did have somebody else join us today. We are having a Under the Crosshairs Unfiltered for our Zodiac Theory member Kim, who is discussing her POI, Frederick Harlan Coe, who is possibly being released today. If you do have any questions for Kim, please put it in the chat. We will be getting to those questions, and please like, subscribe, share. It does help out the channel. And if you are interested, if you're coming to us from outside of the Zodiac community, as well as inside of the Zodiac community, we are having Kim has done a 4-part series, and we are moving on to our 5th part in that series that we will be publishing on our channel. So if you subscribe, you will be able to be alerted when we go live with that feature further on Frederick Harlan Coe. We are getting down to the last few questions, so I just want to remind you, if you do have some questions for Kim, please put them in the chat so we can make sure that we get to them. Next question. The Bates killer shoe prints were from military-style boots. What is Coe's connection to Leavenworth, and where were they made?
Coe's father, being an Army Reserve colonel, received some of his training down in Leavenworth. There's newspaper reports of that. I have his military records as well. I don't know if I have all the documented visits, but the first one I have in the files is 1962, which does predate the Sherry Jo Bates homicide. And I know he was there in 67 as well, and one time in between. So he did make visits to Leavenworth, which I found interesting. Of course, he wouldn't have had to just have access to the surplus stores there, because these were at other bases as well. And I know Mrs. Coe appreciated having access to the base, some things she commented on after all the legal troubles in the Coe family, and they talked about where they would move. And one place was San Diego, where, quote unquote, they would have access to the base. So I think it's a good chance they'd been there as a family previously, because they did travel with Gordon Coe when he had his service obligations, 2 weeks a year and weekends, whatnot. They did some traveling with him, but exactly where all they went, I do not have that information.
Does the violent personal nature of the Bates murder align with Coe's known issues for sexual frustration and impotence?
Well, he definitely struggled with impotence. It started as a teenager and continued on through his adult active years. So he was very frustrated by that. So he would talk about it with his friends, and then he refused to talk about it after a certain point. He studied a lot of books on sexual foreplay, all kinds of stuff to try to improve his prowess. He's also very disenfranchised in high school, as I said, not getting the attention they thought he deserved from the young women, his peers, and being blown off by them. He had a girlfriend in high school at one point that he absolutely idolized. It's cited as the only woman that they really thought he seemed to really truly feel something for, and he kind of put her on a pedestal. And she broke up with him in high school, and he blamed her father for the breakup. And I think there was some problems with the dad's opinion of the relationship. So I think just the confession letter with Bates is like, just the whole tone of the letter itself, I'm stalking your girls, and the brush offs I got in high school. I mean, this is the exact sort of thing that Coe was stewing about. And he even blamed, I dropped out of college because he just missed this girlfriend so much of his. I mean, he used it as an excuse why he dropped out of college, a couple of years later. Seems kind of over the top for, when you factor in what the situation is. It's a high school breakup, and you're altering your whole life trajectory over it 2 years later. You should be over it.
Yeah. It's very similar to when you look at Bundy and his idealization of that early relationships, romantic relationships that he had.
Yeah. He really hung on to things.
Yeah. Coe self-published a book under the moniker Superfry with a large rated X on the cover. Is this a parallel to Zodiac's symbol?
Well, I think it would be hard to miss, having in one location, and we can put that up on screen. just the cover of his self-published book, and having super and fry and a big X all in the same location. I think that kind of, I mean, we have the Zodiac Killer letter with all of that in one letter. And just the whole moniker he uses here, Super Fry, when I think about the Zodiac, it's, oh, that's always been kind of odd. The, threatening, I'm going to go on a kill rampage on Fry night. And, you're thinking, do you mean Friday night? But he says Fry night, Fry. And that's kind of an odd thing to chalk up to just a misspelling. Coe was diving into the counterculture in the late 1960s when he was in San Francisco. And Fry, of course, would make most sense of having a reference to dropping acid. He really loved Tom Wolfe's books. He read those, and in the second half of 1968, the electric Kool-Aid acid test was published, which is all about real life Ken Kesey, who's the guy that got involved in the experimental LSD clinics as a subject, and was bringing the stuff out and giving it to his followers. So they were doing acid, they were doing LSD. And that the term that's associated with that is fry your brains. It comes up in the book. So I think it kind of, that's what resonates with me there when I see Super Fry. And then I think of the Zodiac letters and that Fry and the ammo Super X. It's kind of all there in one place. And then also I'd kind of like to point out at the top of that, since we have it on screen, is this zap, 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 and zappiness. And he's in San Francisco in the late 60s. He reads a lot. I think maybe he would have possibly had access. He would have definitely had access to Zap comics. So, and he is a big plagiarizer. He's always borrowing. So maybe that's the source of that on this page as well.
Yeah, and lampoonery, rudeness, it definitely it definitely fits in with Zodiac. So
yeah.
All right. So next question. The Zodiac claimed to have disguised himself. What evidence is there that Coe was an alibi artist and he used disguise as a defense?
Well, when his house was raided after his arrest, they found the wigs and the hats and the changes of costume of the South Hill Rapist. That's a quote from the Jack Olson's novel. He did a lot of hair changes. His wife, who he's married to in the early 70s, reported that, just longer, shorter, all kinds of different styles. I mean, even when they were putting him in the lineup, he was combing his hair different. Like he was really good at changing his looks, and that makes sense when you say like all the photos he looks so different. He was very adept at that. I think part of that probably came from his mother and her fashion shows and all that kind of stuff, and that focus on looks and his trips to the salon with her, that sort of thing. So I think he had some talents in that way. He also had his wife cutting her hair different ways and showing her off and her clothes and that kind of stuff. So he paid a lot of attention to that sort of stuff. So I think it's well within his capacity to alter his own looks as well. I know he even bleached his hair out when he was really young and bleached it out blonde. And I think he had a big capacity for that changing of looks. His friend described him as an alibi artist. He always had a story. He always had a story from school age up when he got confronted with his bad behavior, his misdeeds. He always had a story. He was an ultimate alibi artist. And he, even during his rape spree, there's evidence that he constructed a framing of another individual.
That's interesting, especially in context to the Zodiac as well. How does the condescending, mocking tone of Coe's newspaper editorials compare to the Zodiac letters to the press?
Well, very much, we have two individuals who wanted to convey a sense of being in control, directing the public. In one letter to a friend of his, he's frustrated by how the public's responded to something concerning his case. He thinks he should set the narrative and people should believe him and they should see things his way. And he doesn't like it when the public doesn't go along with, what he thinks they should believe. And I find that very resonant with the Zodiac being ticked off because people weren't wearing some nice buttons that he wanted them to wear. With two individuals that want to control the public perception, they want to be superior. They want to be in control.
Next question. What is the significance of Coe addressing a high school classmate as kid, a term Zodiac used for his victims?
Yeah, it's interesting. People have cited that as, oh, the Zodiac must have been older because he used the term kid. Well, Coe was using that when he was a teenager in high school. At least there's evidence of it in his signature in a friend's yearbook or an acquaintance's yearbook. He says, "Hiya, kid." He's again, everything he does, he's always trying to convey a sense of elevation over others. So it wouldn't surprise me in the least if he wrote a letter discussing his crimes and he referred to some college age people as kids or, high schoolers as well, for sure.
Brian Hartnell described Zodiac's voice as young. How does this overlooked detail support a suspect who was 22 at the time?
Yeah, that's been described as one of the most overlooked details in the case. And Brian Hartnell himself was college age. He would have been in a good position to recognize the voice of another person being in his peer group. Although, you can't always use voice to accurately guess age. Oftentimes it can be off. But I think it keeps the window wide open. This could have been someone who was 22 years old. And he sounded like a 22-year-old. He could have been a 22-year-old. So I think it's an important detail.
It, also, another thing that always struck me was that Brian also said there was something familiar about the voice. Where Coe was in radio broadcasting school, is there a possibility that he was had maybe done some guest spots on radio shows in the area during the time that Brian may have heard, where that familiarity may have
But
been familiar?
that's Yeah, that's very possible. Like I said, he quit his radio jobs in Spokane in 1969 by by summertime for sure, late spring. And he'd gone at some point to California and to check out jobs in San Francisco. And I think it's very possible he could have found some night shift job somewhere, picked up some shifts, and that Brian could have heard him on the radio. That would have made a lot of sense. He also says in the deposition that the latest he earned money in radio work was July or August of 69. It's like, yeah, but you said you quit your radio jobs by late spring. So where did you earn this money? We don't know where you are. So it could have been the radio station associated with Pacific Union College there, down there. He worked at a Christian radio station in Spokane. I think it was maybe relatively easy for him to get a job there in 1969. He claims he worked at KJRB after he finished radio school. But I talked to two people who were there in 68, 69. They said, no, he wasn't here. I was really in tune and he wasn't here. But they did report he worked in the mid 70s briefly there. So that was interesting as well. But yeah, I think he could have been a familiar voice to Brian because he could have been on the radio.
Next question. Can you elaborate on the handwriting similarities, specifically the reverse tail on the letter G? Let me pull that up for you.
Well, the examples that we have today aren't the letter G, but they have the same effect. On his G's, the tails tend to look like a little bit like Q's. They kind of curve the other direction a little bit. And I noticed that in the Zodiac's writings. So here we have some numbers that this is his handwriting. There's 2 9s on this document. One's at the top. It's his incarceration number. And the other one's lower on date of birth of his father. And you can see the same effect there. And this is just how his G's look as well. There's this tailing out. I've got a copy of Brian Hartnell's car door, and I just want to compare that here as well. We can take a look at that and compare that. There we go. So you see the same effect on the 9s here. I don't spend a lot of time on handwriting analysis because I don't, frankly, have a lot of confidence in it. I think the more you stare at it, the more things can contort. You can see things that aren't there. But this is one thing that's jumped out to me. There have been other things that have jumped out to me about his handwriting besides the G's and the 9s. His F's are pretty fanciful, and this F here in knife looks a lot like the F in the Riverside Desk Chat poem for sure. And Coe has a very fanciful way of making his F's. It doesn't look exactly like this, but it is something to consider as well. So otherwise, I don't see, it's hard to compare, because I think the Zodiac was trying to modify his handwriting as well. So how much stake to put in it? I don't really know. I don't use it's not a strong element in my case, but there are some very interesting observations nonetheless.
How does the FBI's theory of sexual substitution explain Coe's potential shift from murder back to sexual crimes?
Okay, there's always talk about escalating and de-escalating. And I think one thing when I frame my thinking about all this is really these offenders have triggers and it puts them over a certain threshold and they'll offend. And we do see what seems to be escalating patterns in people, but really when you look at an individual crime, you have to look at the motive. It has to you have to look at that specific crime in the context of itself only and ask yourself, what is the motive for this crime? And I think for Coe, the motives that he had in his life were for attention. And I think that aligns very well with the Zodiac, who was making threats against the public because he wanted front page publication. That's what he was demanding. And Sharon Hagan seems to take off on that and says this was the emotional payoff for this offender. He wanted to be famous. He wanted to be famous in San Francisco. And that's what Coe desired. He desired to be famous in large markets. Seattle wasn't good enough for him, quote unquote. He called it sea puddle. He wanted places like LA and New York, and he liked San Francisco, and he spent time there, and he was familiar with it. So if he was going to do something nefarious and to try to promote himself, San Francisco would be a logical choice for him. And I think that it's not a matter of escalating and then de-escalating to rape. It's I want to be famous. What do I need to do to get there? And looking at that in its context and those crimes apart from these rapes later on where he was clearly out of control, relatively out of control of himself. He still had a lot of control because he was monitoring the news feedback then too, and he was modifying his behavior during his rape spree. When they started tailing him, they could observe this. If something came out in the newspaper, he'd lay low. If they put out a fake story at one point, and sure enough, he came out of his house and started stalking again. I mean, he was monitoring the newspapers carefully, and his goals there were sexual release of sexual frustration and power, very likely power control.
Yeah. And it is interesting when you look at serial killers that they can go through periods where they can forego that desire to kill simply because of what the other things that are going on in their lives. So sometimes we take a look at serial killers almost like that they come out fully formed, but they are just like other human beings going through life where they develop, they go through different phases in their lives where their needs are different, and the purpose of the murders or the sexual crimes serve different purposes for them at different times. So sometimes it's not quite as linear as like an escalation or a de-escalation. It really depends on what's going on in their personal lives.
Yeah, that's true.
Why would a violent rapist de-escalate from murder, or does the change in MO simply reflect an evolving motive?
Yeah, and I think with Coe, he was college dropout by 68. He had some success going to radio school and getting some night jobs, some fill-in weekend type work. But then, he seems to be like adrift again, looking for radio work in California, maybe back in Spokane working a little bit. But every time he's in Spokane, he's got his mother, present there. And that's a big source of frustration for him. And then he starts this business that, there's no evidence went anywhere, but he's trying something different, but it's also making him less supervised. He's down in California, he's not married. But then, after 1969, he's back up in Spokane in the beginning of the very beginning of 1970. He leaves Spokane to go to LA. And he is back up there briefly in March. His friend came home from Vietnam and his friend didn't want to go with him. And that was, hey, I waited for you. Let's go. We're going to go make a success of ourselves. And he'd fall in love with some woman at that point. So that was, in March, Coe heads back down to LA then. And I just think that, the Kathleen Johns situation makes sense because now he's frustrated. But then, 70 comes and goes, and he's done in LA, and he's briefly working in Spokane, and he meets his wife. So then, he's with her from the end of 71 till sometime in 1970. Well, he marries her at the end of 72, and then in the spring of 76, they file for divorce. So he's got this period where he's now married. So there's that, sense of, empowerment that he gets from that, whatever that is, even though it's a frustrating marriage. He's got this woman that's committed to him, and he's got this radio job in Las Vegas that is at a station that really is a big deal. And then he gets fired from there eventually, but he's working at these discos, and he's getting attention from a lot of women at these discos. So, I see a lot of cause for relative personal fulfillment compared to what he had going, in the late 60s. So I definitely see a cause for him quieting down during that time.
Makes sense. What makes Coe a stronger suspect than other well-known POIs who also have significant circumstantial evidence against them?
Well, I really think it goes back to his specific behaviors and what a good match those are for the Zodiac. If Coe were going to commit a crime, if he were going to commit murder, how would he go about it? Well, he'd probably construct a fake persona, because that's what he does when he wants to further his goals. He operates under a contrived, for him a contrived persona. He uses monikers. He interacts with the media. He makes phone calls. He's a prolific phone caller during his crimes. So, I mean, there's all of the elements that are present with the Zodiac that make it so interesting. Those are all present with Coe. And you would expect that somebody, if they were going to do something and commit acts like this, that they would operate within their own MO. And this is really his MO. This is how he operates in his everyday life.
Yeah. Next question. If forensics DNA prints ever definitively rule out Coe, how would you explain the staggering number of coincidences?
Well, I always say anything can happen, and truly it can. We have infinite scenarios that can occur, and it would be quite amazing that all of these things connect so well, and so many more that we won't have time to cover today. But it would be absolutely amazing that, I mean, it wasn't him. But if it wasn't him, it would have to be somebody who is very much like him. I would expect them to be very much like Fred Coe. I think he, at a minimum, does a really good job of illuminating the case for us.
I agree. Also, the thing is that whether or not he was Zodiac, I think the gaps that in his timeline are very telling. So if it wasn't if he wasn't Zodiac, the question is, where was he and what was he doing during those time frames? So
certainly want an answer to those questions.
Yeah. And just a reminder to our audience, we have a few more people who have joined us. We're down to the last few questions. So if you do have some questions that you would like to ask him about her POI, Frederick Harlan Coe, the reason that we're doing her live today is because we did find out yesterday that he is having a hearing today and may possibly be released. So if you do have a question, pop it in the chat. Next question. What single piece of undiscovered evidence, a weapon, a document, a confession, would break this case open?
Well, there aren't a lot of possibilities here. We have predated the age of DNA with all these cases, and even with a lot of Coe's offenses, there was in the end only one piece of DNA that 100% officially tied him to one of his rapes. But I think the one thing that has the most potential is an mtDNA profile on him run down to Riverside. I'm a chemist. I'm most comfortable with laboratory analysis. We can prove things. They can be proved beyond reasonable doubt if we have something from the laboratory, something that is as specific as DNA. An mtDNA does not carry the weight of the YSTR profiles, But boy, if it was a match, my work would be done, uh, and I would hope it would be followed up on.
What is the one question you would ask Frederick Coe himself if you could?
Well, I did send him a letter in January. I've sent him other correspondence before, more holiday and birthday cards, that sort of thing. Spent so much time studying him, I kind of felt like I should send him a card at times. But sent him a letter in January, and effectively in the letter, I asked him what probably would be the most important thing to me to ask him, and that was that I asked him to confess. Certainly, he has things he needs to confess to. Whether I'm right about everything I think he's done or none of it, he still has plenty of things he needs to confess to, and I think he needs to do that. So that is what I would ask him.
Great. And Dark Side of the Moon. Good to have you here. Hopefully you're still here. We have a few new people. Thank you for dropping in here and helping to moderate. And this is a question. Next question is a question. This is actually from 60th Fever. Are you ready to interview Coe if you get a chance? And his other question was, would you be afraid if you found out that he was the Zodiac Killer?
I would say that when I started this journey, yes. The answer to all of that would be yes, I'd be terrified. And I actually had some sleep issues for a period of time because honestly, I did not have a true crime interest before 2018. And I was hesitant to enter it. It's a long story, and I'm not going to go into it here. But you know, I had fears about reading about things like this, and it was very unsettling to me. And I'm in a different place today with it all. And no, I'm not afraid of Frederick Coe, and I'm not afraid of. I would not be afraid of sitting across a desk from him. And I don't think I could have said that 4 years ago. But yeah, I am ready to interview him if I were ever to get a chance. Had applied to visit him at McNeil Island. They didn't even respond to my application.
So Death by Stereo, I give him a 0 out of a 10 as a suspect. No offense. And you know what, Death by Stereo, I am going to challenge you. Kim has done 4 parts so far. And we, like I said, we do have a 5th part coming up that we're going to be probably filming on the October 19th. Today's presentation is really in response to the hearing that they had today of his possible release. So today's presentation really was not a full outlining of Kim's case for her POI. So what I do challenge you to do is to go ahead and subscribe to our channel. And when she does have, when we do bring those parts out, watch them, and then let us know after you've been able to assess everything that she has to say, because really this is only just a brief covering of some of the questions that our people on Zodiac Theory Discord who have had an opportunity to hear a little bit more about her suspect so far. But if you would like to respond to that, Kim, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. I think it's important to, when it comes to Frederick Coe, to think very carefully. He fooled a lot of people. And I mean, his ex-wife said that after his arrest. She said, he just fooled so many people, and she said things like, he made me into a different person. I can't explain. And she cryptically referred to things that she had done, things that she just were not in her nature to do. He was such a manipulator. And she made a comment to his friend. She said, I could put him away for 100 years. But all she disclosed to him was, yeah, well, we did that dine and dash thing down in Southern California, and he put me out on the street to beg. And nobody goes to a prison for 100 years for any of that. In fact, they don't necessarily go to prison at all for any of that. She knew things that were so much deeper and darker, and she could not come forth with them, which suggests she was maybe somewhat implicated. She was an alcoholic. She was codependent on him. So she was afraid. She was in fear at the time. So she wasn't going to out him on these things, but it's just further evidence that there's a lot of dark past there that's never come into the light. So you have to be very careful when you think about Frederick Coe. He really did fool a lot of people. And he was, he schemed, he was very grandiose. I mean, the sky's really the limit on what he did from the late 1960s all the way through the 1970s. And I have some very good ideas about what some of that was and some of the locations where that happened.
And I do, Death by Stereo, thank you for your comment. And I'm somebody who doesn't have a POI, and I'm very skeptical about people. But it also is important to make sure that you keep an open mind and hear what other people have to say about their different POIs. Because truthfully, as somebody who doesn't have a POI, I find a little bit of something that I can learn out of everybody on Zodiac Theory Discord. The people who do their research, I learn things every day, and they're able to uncover different things. And even if it doesn't have an impact on their own POI, the great thing about Zodiac Theory Discord is that we are a community that works together to do research on this, and we work in a way that we are able to interact, listen, learn, and yet still be skeptical. So we definitely appreciate it if not only that you share your opinion, which was great, but also that you definitely come back and watch some of what we have to present on her POI further, because I think that even if he isn't Zodiac, I think he definitely is a very interesting true crime case if you're interested in psychology. And as Kim has said, the background of who the Zodiac probably is. We have Sam Fisher. Sam Fisher says hello. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for joining.
And we have a question here. Let's see. Did you know that he was going to be released, or was this a surprise?
I'm on another platform, and somebody did a direct message to me yesterday. It was the first time I heard it. And I occasionally sweep the news looking for anything that's come up on him. Obviously, it had been a few weeks, so I was completely stunned last night, completely blindsided. I didn't know exactly what to think or feel about it, but it really doesn't affect my efforts, whether he's being cared for at the special commitment center or he's in a group home, and it's either going to be Spanaway or Federal Way. There's some conflicting information in the news, but it's going to be in Washington State. So, but I have been operating under the belief that this was never going to happen, and that's been stated elsewhere, that he was never going to get out because he would not confess and he would not participate in rehabilitation. But he has deteriorated so much that they feel he's not in the position to pose a risk to the public. So he's going to be sent out probably in the next 24 hours, as long as there's a place ready for him.
You know what? Do you know ahead of time? Like, is he required? Do you know if he's going to be required to stay in Washington?
Well, he'll have to register as a sex offender, and he himself has made the request as to where he's going, and it's in Washington. Yes. So I think he will stay in Washington. He does have a sister in Washington, so it does make sense. His one surviving family member, that it would be within, reasonable distance.
The X perhaps in reference to Sorry No Cipher, X on the one letter.
Yeah, it's another place that shows up. it does make sense. The Zodiac was into symbolism, Co was into symbolism. It's possible. I can't speak direct, in a real deep detail about it because it's not something I'm sure what that means to Co on the book, and what that meant to the Zodiac. So that's where you don't want to try to get into someone's head. Fortunately, in the case of my investigation in Co, I've said it before, he's vomited his brains up everywhere. So I don't have to usually spend too much time trying to guess or get in his head. There's a lot of information out there that's pretty revealing. It kind of gives you a good sense of what something meant to him. And because you know what he likes and what things he values and, books he read, there's a lot of things to research with him, a lot of things to go after, and a lot of interesting finds in those locations.
All right, another question from Sam. Being a narcissist, any possibility he learns he is being accused of being the Zodiac and then takes full advantage of that?
Again, I don't want to try to get too much into his head, but if I had to predict, because I've studied him for over 6 years and I kind of have some ideas about how he'd react, I think it would be deny, deny, deny. And he would probably insult me, say it's ridiculous that he's being accused of everything from, the being the monster of Florence to, he'd probably go on and on because he knows about all these high profile things as well. So he'd ridicule me and he'd deny. So bring it on.
And that's the interesting thing about him is that even he completely denies that he's the South Hill rapist. Correct? He's still doing everything.
Yeah. He talks in letters about the South Hill rapist. He is not the South Hill rapist. And yeah, Sam, even if he's not the Zodiac, he'll still deny it. He'll still respond. As long as he has the mental and the physical capacity to respond to something like that, my prediction is that he would respond. Endless letters from prison to the newspapers over the harpiest little details. Something would be said about him in the paper and he'd object to it. He'd write a letter to the newspaper and they'd publish a lot of that stuff, well after his arrest.
Now it looks like that's all of our questions for today, unless anybody pops anything else up in the chat. And we are at 1 minute 32, or 1 hour 32, which is a really nice round time. Once again, for everybody who's joined us, thank you. We do appreciate you. Where we are getting started, make sure that you like, subscribe, and share. And once again, please make sure that you subscribe so that you can watch the rest of the series on Kim's POI, Frederick, Harlan, Co. Like I said, if you're joining us from outside of the Zodiac community, welcome. We primarily cover Zodiac Killer theories here. However, if you are interested in true crime, this is a great channel to follow. For example, Kim's POI, whether he is a Zodiac Killer or not, he is a very interesting true crime case to follow. Kim does an excellent job in her series through the Crosshairs, covering him in depth. So if you are somebody who likes true crime and likes to deep dive into cases, this is a channel for you. And Kim's series that we are going to be releasing definitely is one you want to catch. So thank you all for joining us, and we will see you on our next presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.